Hi, Julia, can you hear me? This is a test.
Clean everything up.
Clean up.
Go back to helping out. That's the computer too.
I told us not to touch it.
Yeah.
Okay, no, this one, we're not touching.
This is a hard one. You know what I'm talking about.
Trust you.
This is a hard one.
Other eye.
Good, I'm glad. I know we didn't talk about it.
Hold my stomach in.
Of course.
Absolutely.
So it's like a little shiny thing or like a white thing. Glitter? Maybe.
There was a little accident. Do we have any extra?
Yeah, this.
Yeah, our group is getting a little bit of Sam.
Yeah.
Hi, Julia, checking my audio.
Oh, really?
What the deal is.
We can hear you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's getting some good.
He's at home. Yeah, I can scoop too.
That's fine, I got room. Thanks. Liver on it or something.
Down here. I'm gonna have to show you the materials. I think you got some.
Pretty good.
I think there's a garbage here.
Oh, you need some too? Julia, you have a pen? All the stuff I brought, I didn't bring a pen.
Yeah.
No worries, if not, I can take notes on. There was. There too. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Oh.
It's from back here.
No.
I think.
Oh,
Yeah, no,
You
maybe
guys-
I'll do both.
this.
Fancy setup today.
I'm not gonna say anything.
Yeah.
Those, where do those come from? Oh, right. Oh, placemat.
According to the clock behind me, we're very early by about an hour, so. It is nice for it to be light out at this time of day. It feels good. Okay, so a couple minutes past the hour. Welcome, everybody. We are doing a joint city council and planning commission workshop agenda this Thursday, March 16th, 2023. May I have a roll call, please?
We're gonna start with the planning commission.
Great.
So Commissioner Esty,
Here.
Commissioner Will,
Here.
Commissioner Jackson,
Here.
Vice Chair Christensen,
Here.
and Chair Westman.
Here.
And then for the city council, Councilmember Brooks,
Here.
Councilmember Clark,
Here.
Councilmember Peterson,
Here.
Vice Mayor Brown,
Here.
and Mayor Kaiser.
Here. Everybody's here. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Do we have any additions or deletions on the agenda?
No,
Oh, sorry, I'm looking over there.
we do not this evening.
Thank you. And any additional materials?
Proceed to public comments in advance of this meeting. The public comments are distributed to each of the designers and they're posted online for public review today.
Great, thank you. Okay, we can move on to oral communications. This is for members of the public to speak on any consent items and anything that's not itemized on tonight's agenda. You'll be limited to a 3-minute talk. Do we have any oral communications from the public? Come on up.
Hello, good evening. My name's John Haken and I live at Cabrillo Estates Mobile Home Park on Rosedale Avenue, Capitola. The 12-year lease with Vieira Enterprises, who own the park, expires May this year. Vieira Enterprises notified us that our monthly space rent will increase by $358 to $1,000 a month, an increase of over 55%. Vieira Enterprises will notify us prior to May 31st to enter a new agreement at a date time that they will specify. Our lease, existing lease, states that the good faith negotiations need to be entered 60 days prior to May 31st. That's the 31st of this month. Previously, Capitola City Council helped the Homeowners Association then negotiate a lease agreement with Vieira Enterprises. My questions are the councillors aware of this unethical rent increase? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Hi.
My name is Laura Tucker. I also live at the Cabrillo Mobile Home Estates at the top of Rosedale Avenue above Gale's Bakery, right there by the highway. And I'm on a very low, way below the poverty line, fixed income. In the year 2000, I inherited some money from my grandmother, and I bought a mobile home. At that time, it was under rent control. I never would have moved into the city of Capitola. I couldn't have afforded it. The city council at the time valiantly fought rent control for, well, you can look up the history, but quite some time. And it just got appealed and appealed and appealed until they just couldn't fight it anymore. There was a water main break and different reasons that it just wasn't affordable. What I heard was the same set of lawyers worked their way up the coast of California, starting with the Anza Mobile Home Park in the county, eliminating rent control. So we were able to negotiate a 12-year lease And with the help of the city, the main woman who organized that was named Gail Levy, and she has since passed away. So we are really panicked at the mobile home park because we really don't know the terrain politically, and we don't have any representation. So we're looking for your help. One of the things that Gail told me before she left the park was that we could renegotiate our lease. And we also were told, I'm looking at this flyer that she put out, that future disputes to be negotiated between owner and homeowners. Should negotiations fail, mediation will be used. And there was a $70,000 award that we had won that we agreed to forgive as part of this 12-year lease agreement. But now we've gotten this notice. My family personally will probably, we have no options. Right now, after paying rent, utilities, my car insurance, and internet, I have $100 left a month to live on, which I actually manage pretty well on that. Believe it or not, but I have no wiggle room whatsoever. So that's what we're just pleading for some help, representation. If you could point us in the right direction, let us know how we can learn what our rights are and if they're being violated or if we have any leverage whatsoever. We are scrambling to form a homeowners association, and we only met once so far last Saturday. We're meeting again Saturday at 1 o'clock. If anybody is interested in coming to our meeting at the clubhouse, we would love to have you. And I have emailed Katie Herlihy and spoke also with George and Sean. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting last names right now, but my email is also on the oral communications list. And I have another issue that I will bring up that is related during that time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Diane Delisle. I am a resident of the Cabrillo Mobile Home Estates. I am also a beginning member of the Homeowners Association, which Laura referred to. I'm obviously a senior. I don't make the lowest income qualifications. However, I am a totally fixed income. If Mr. Vieira is allowed to go ahead with the $1,000 increase, it's only a matter of time before I am priced out of my home. We desperately need legal assistance of any form. Hopefully, I would hope, because our park has seniors, disabled, ethnic minorities of almost every kind of type that currently live in California: Chinese, Vietnamese, Cambodian, various Hispanic, as well as ordinary people, white folks like me, and many, many seniors. And I do know, in addition to Laura, of others who cannot pay a $1,000 increase, that they would become immediately homeless. And since it would appear that the state is concerned about the overall housing picture, that keeping people in the homes that they already dwell in should in some form be addressed in the context of the housing initiative, whatever that's called. So any help that you can give us, particularly in my case, the seniors, I'm 83 years old. I don't have and I have health problems. There is no option for me beyond my current fixed income to get a job to earn more money to make up the rent difference. So it would only be a matter of time for I too would be out. Thank you very much for your consideration and hopefully for your help in at least helping us negotiate or leading us to a proper estate-oriented attorney. Anything would help. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Short. My name is Marilyn Chapp. Sorry, I'm trying to be careful. I haven't had COVID yet, and I'm doing my best to avoid it. Basically, I'm also someone who was there when we negotiated the 12-year lease, and I since had a house fire. I have had to put on a new place, so I have a big mortgage. I'm in my mid-70s, still working because I can't afford that mortgage and the space rent as it is without continuing to work. I'm not sure everybody here understands how park-owned, when somebody else owns the park, how it operates. Basically, what it means is we own our homes. Either they're already paid off for somebody who's been there for a long time, or like me, we have a large mortgage that we're paying for the home. There's no place else to take the home, so it's not like you can move it. This is it. This is our home. This is our investment. And what we rent is the little piece of ground that it's sitting on, essentially. That's the rent, what the rent goes for. And any services, which can be pretty hit and miss sometimes at that particular park. There's not a lot of options. Now, Mr. Vieira in the past, the Vieira Company in the past has sent the letter telling us during the course of our lease in February, usually around between the 5th and the 10th. Last year it was the 10th, what the new lease or the new amount would be. This year, it was pretty clear that it was written and sent, because I've still got I'm happy to provide you with documentation on those, because I have all of those things. And this year it was written and sent on the 28th. We didn't get it actually until after February, because it had to be sent by mail, which gave us very little time to try and put something together. And then he sent us something about 2 or 3 days later that said that we would be, he would be setting up a new lease for us to sign. And clearly with the idea that the Vieiras are in the driver's seat at this stage, which is why we are now trying to pull together. In other words, we weren't late getting to it. We literally had no idea of the magnitude of what he was going to be asking until the beginning, the first few days of this month.
Thank you. Any other members of the public?
Good evening, Council. My name is Anthony Kresge. I own Reef Dog Deli. I'm approaching you tonight to discuss the hardships I'm facing, much like many others, to spend thousands of dollars on our prototype parklet materials in the next 60 days. Although I am participating in the prototype parklet design program and currently paying the increased rent for the permanent space that would otherwise be parking revenue, I am generally excited about the opportunity to have street side diners. However, we need time to procure and pay for the materials to fit the space. Bottom line, our revenue stream has been well below average since that horrific January 5th day. I'm down 20 to 25% a day over last winter. That's a few thousand a week, $10,000 a month. Hey, a new parklet. This is not just your normal winter slowness. Our village was hit so bad, the President of the United States came to visit us. That's a big deal. Wow, in fact, that's amazing. And every news channel across the nation, even the world, would be here to document it. Tens of thousands of people came to check it out. But do you think even 0.0005% spent any money while they were here to help others? Not really. Still, I stayed open like a few others in hopes that I might earn a few dollars to pay for the bills that I was quickly falling way behind on. When most businesses closed, because why open? The lifeline, the esplanade of this village was in shambles. Still, we showed up. I not only showed up, I went way beyond and threw together a fundraiser that raised over $40,000 in just 3 short weeks and helped out restaurant workers so that they could buy groceries and put food on their tables. But instead of getting a letter of thanks, I got a certified letter from the city that I was not compliant with my parklet. We need a better recovery plan. When I think we're getting time allowed to earn money that takes more than just 30 days, we're expected to get right back to the parklet plans, submit the building permit, and have construction done within another month. That will cost each business owner over $15,000 in this time frame. We need you to show us that you're worried about where we're going to find thousands of dollars, and that we're not there for and that's just not there for us in the most difficult winter since the 1980s. We need you to show us that you're here for small businesses like myself because you generally want us to be here and not worry wide awake at nighttime wondering where we might go if we can't recover. We're doing the best we can, but without benefiting financial support from FEMA or grant money outside the borrowing money, we obviously can't support. Bottom line, we rely on the village and wharf being rebuilt, which I know you're expediting as quickly as possible. Here's what I'm asking for, that you give us an extension till at least June 30th to build our deck foundation and install the bike racks. This is something I'm working on with set plans from a licensed contractor that I know will significantly help the site look better out of the street slope and the drainage concerns. I'm also asking for an extension till at least October 15th to procure the materials for our financial permanent prototype materials in hopes that we recover financially in the alignment that the Esplanade is opening. And finally, I'm asking,
You can wrap up.
we'll just do it another time. In conclusion,
Yes, conclude.
okay. We need to fill empty spaces. We need to rebuild our village, all of it. Rely on you to help us keep our revenue local in order to get stronger for years to come. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you. Any members of the public? Any other comments? Seeing none, are there any online? Thank you. Okay.
Mayor Kaiser, if I may, I don't see it on tonight's agenda for our opportunity for comment. And so I just want to take the opportunity right now to see if we can ask staff to come back with information on what the city is actually capable of offering or working with for the Cabrillo Mobile Estates. And then if we can encourage staff to work with Reef Dog on a plan for his request this evening. If staff could do that.
Do you have a response for the?
So yes, I did want to bring you up to date. So we have learned about Cabrillo in the past week and what has occurred there. I am meeting with the newly formed HOA members tomorrow. During that meeting, I look forward to hearing more about exactly, I have a pretty clear indication, but exactly how many of these notices were sent out and getting more details from them. As well as brainstorming solutions to discuss. So we are very much aware of it as staff and looking forward to working with Cabrillo. And I can also bring an update on outdoor dining. I was planning on giving you a status update in the Friday update this week as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Was there any other council comments? I know it wasn't on there, but we usually have them. So we can move on to item 5, which is our general government. We have 5A, this is the citywide housing element work session. I believe I will turn it back over to Ms. Hurley.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council, and thank you, Planning Commissioners. It's really wonderful to have you all in the same room tonight to talk about a very important topic for the City of Capitola, our housing element. This is a very important step in this for the city to identify sites which could be redeveloped or developed in the future to accommodate housing. Just to start off, the big message here is our job as the city is to plan for sites and locate sites, and it will be the developers within our community who will come in and actually develop sites. So that is our task in this effort. Tonight, I'm pleased to introduce to you Veronica Tam of Veronica Tam and Associates. You've all seen her via Zoom, and here we are in person. And Brett Stinson with RRM Design. And so Brett has been working really hard on helping us identify sites and do a lot of the statistics in the background and creating beautiful maps for us. And Veronica brings her housing expertise and a lot of years of experience in housing element updates. So today we had the pleasure of driving around our beautiful city and going through and seeing every site that's identified on these maps. Also going through and looking at our built environment and the densities that exist throughout beautiful Capitola. So we really had a lovely day, and I feel like it was very productive for them to, and so if we can go to the next slide, please. I also did want to mention, I only intend to keep you here for about 2 hours at the most. I hope by 8 p.m. you can all enjoy this beautiful day and go home and have your dinner. So I will try to we'll keep this moving along. So as I introduced, we've got Brett Stinson and Veronica Tam on our consultant team. Next slide. Tonight, we're going to focus in on, we've given you an intro before, but just in case there's anyone new out there watching this evening and the audience tonight, what is a housing element? And then really our task tonight, our focus is going to be on the sites inventory. We published a map that was in the last packet. This map is the first draft. And from here, we're just starting our work, okay? So sites that are on this map can be removed, sites can be added. We're just starting our public process on this. So I wanna make it very clear that this is the time that we really wanna get feedback from our planning commission, our city council, and our public on what other sites would they like to see, what sites do they think are inappropriate. And I'm available at any time for letters and emails to be sent into City Hall. And then we'll be going over the Capitola sites inventory. There are maps available in the back of the room if anyone in the audience would like one. And we have the ability to zoom in on sites tonight as we're talking about them. So next slide, please. I'll hand it off.
Great. With that, I just want to go over for the benefit of the public, especially those who have not attended any of the meetings yet, what exactly is the housing element? That is part of your general plan. There are some required elements in your general plan. Housing is one of them. The housing element looks at the needs in your community, not only your current residents' needs, but also projected needs in the future, and how you're going to address those needs with the constraints and resources that you have. The housing element is a little bit different than the rest of the general plan in that it has to be updated every 8 years on some kind of a statutory deadline. The general plan usually have a longer horizon, about 20 years or so, and the update timeline is up to the local jurisdiction, but the housing element itself is very much regulated. For the 6th cycle housing element update in your area, in this region, the deadline is December 31st, 2023. So it's actually by the end of this year. What also is different about the housing element is that it has to go through a very rigorous review by a state agency for compliance with housing element law. Now, if you go to the government code, the whole general plan may have like about 30, 40 pages of regulations or law. If you go to the housing element, that's over 300 pages. So that's kind of how complicated the housing element is. The agency responsible for reviewing the housing element is the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. And throughout this whole process of developing the housing element, you'll hear me talk about the HCD quite a bit in the future. Next slide. So when we send the housing element to the state for review, the most critical component of that review is your site's inventory, your ability to meet the regional housing needs allocation. Now, by definition, regional housing needs is your share of the region's housing need. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's housing that's generated from within the community. Your needs may be more, maybe less, but for the regional housing needs allocation is your share of the overall region's needs. And that's something that you have to accommodate in order to get a housing element that's certified by the state. Just like Katie mentioned before, the site inventory, your obligation is identify sites with appropriate densities and development standards that can facilitate and encourage a variety of housing types for all income groups. Your obligation is not for production because you cannot function as a developer, but you need to act in good faith to make sure that the regulatory environment for development is such that it can facilitate and encourage a development. So in terms of the site inventory, what we had talked about, next slide, it's really, I covered that already. It's really your capacity to accommodate the regional housing needs allocation. And we have to identify parcel by parcel why the site, that parcel is feasible within the next 8 years to be developed or redeveloped into additional housing. So that's something that's the challenge that we have to face because the city of Capitola, we drove around, there's not a lot of vacant sites available in the community. So a lot of these sites that we have to identify are non-vacant sites, and non-vacant sites are more difficult in terms of development. Next slide. So how do we how do we kind of come up with the sites inventory? Usually we start with the fifth cycle housing element, like you have identified some sites in your fifth cycle housing element. Some of those sites continue to be available. Are those sites appropriate today based on the current conditions? So we have to look in the evaluation, maybe drop some of the sites because they've been redeveloped or that some other conditions have occurred that we cannot continue to keep them. Then the other thing that we need to look at is what about other sites that you have that are appropriately zoned that you did not identify in the housing element before because your RENA was smaller last time and you didn't have to identify that many sites. This time your RENA is large, so we have to look for other appropriately zoned sites. Are there any ones that we can, based on the changing economic conditions and also retail climate and a lot of the different factors may affect what sites becomes feasible today. And we also can look at a list of site projects that are either pending or approved already, but are not, but they have not actually issued building permits or completed yet. We have the ability to credit those projects against the regional housing needs allocation. So with all of that, we have to look at now with all the sites that we identified, do we have enough to meet the regional housing needs allocation? Then the other thing that we would talk about is what about how the sites are distributed. There is a new state law, AB 686, affirmatively furthering fair housing. That is actually almost the driving force of a lot of the new regulations today, or new laws today, is how do you plan for housing in an equitable manner so that you're not concentrating housing in particular locations and that you are facilitating mobility, diversity, and also variety of housing within your community. So just kind of look at your, next slide, I'm sorry. So as I mentioned before, your sites that you have approved, entitled, and constructed To some extent, some of them can be credited towards the regional housing needs allocation. There's a housing element planning period. That's December 31st, 2023 to December 31st, 2031. There is the regional housing needs allocation projection period, which actually starts June 30th this year. So it starts like 6 months before the beginning of the housing element. So anything that you permitted, approved, or finalized after June 30th, that you can actually create new units for occupancy as of June 30th, 2023, you can credit it towards the regional housing needs allocation. And so go to next slide. So if you look at this summary, that current status that we're looking at right now, your regional housing needs allocation this round is 1,336 units, a very, very significant increase over your fifth cycle housing element. But you do have one project that's approved right now with 36 units, and that's an affordable housing project. So we can credit them, and it's approved, and it will be built within the 8-year planning period. So therefore, we can credit it. You still have a regional housing needs allocation of 1,300 units that we must identify sites to accommodate that. Now, we can look at ADUs, accessory dwelling units, as one of the sources for meeting your regional housing needs allocation. But state law does not allow us to identify ADUs by capacity. So we cannot say because we have so many single family homes, and therefore there could be so many potential ADUs in the city. It is not based on capacity. State law specifically says for crediting your ADUs, we can only do it based on trend. So how many ADUs that you have permitted since the change in state law, which is 2018. So between the average between 2018 to 2022, we can use the average to project that into the future. It's not a lot, but it does give you some units that you can use against your RHNA, but it's certainly not as much as you could if you were to identify potential parcels. Then you have only one vacant site that is zoned for housing, and that can accommodate 2 units. And so we have to rely on primarily non-vacant sites. And that's why Katie took us around today to look at some of the potential sites, and which will be presented by Katie later on. So our challenge definitely is, where do we really fit the extra 1,300 units or so within your zoning? One thing that we do want to, next slide, say that is, Katie will go over some of the slides, but definitely, as we talked about, looking at the fifth cycle sites, and we were able to keep some, but then we do have to remove some. But with that, I'm going to pass it on.
Can I ask a question? Okay, so we can't take in consideration an assessment of future ADUs as part of our deal. But what about State Bill 9, where people can split their lots up into parcels of 2 or 4? Can we make an assessment of what people are going to do with regard to that?
SB 9 is also similar to ADU. They want you to demonstrate that there is a trend of doing that. And I asked Katie already, so far there hasn't been any. And so it would be very difficult to do that. I was able to do it for one community, and but it goes through a lot of exercise, and ultimately it has to be, again, based on a trend, and so not a lot of yields.
How many, I'm going to ask Katie a question. How many in our trend, how many do we have?
SB 9?
ADU units. That
ADU units. We're trending up. So we've seen a steady increase since 2018. And I want to, right now, it's one of the more common building permits that we've received. We're currently doing our assessment for 2022 of how many new units were built in Capitola. But I'm projecting that we're going to see, we've been under 10 consistently, but now I think I'm hoping for last year to be about 12. So we're seeing a consistency of more and more ADUs. It's trending up. And for this exercise, I believe we've identified 50 units within the next cycle. Is that correct, Brett? Based on that trend. So are there any other questions at this point about housing elements? Okay, I'm going to move on then. So now on this slide, we're showing the 5th cycle housing element. We were responsible for finding sites for 146 units. We have reutilized the majority of these sites within our housing element update, except for the hotel site on Hill and also Terra Court, which was developed behind the Osh building. Next slide, please. So I'm going to walk through the different types of sites that are allowed through HCD. On this slide, you're seeing the 2 vacant lots that I've scoured this city looking for vacant lots. If anyone knows of any other vacant lots, please let me know. I was going to do a quiz of how many vacant lots are there in Capitola, but these are the 2 that I know of. And just to be clear, they have to be undeveloped in any way. So if there is a parking lot, I'll show you an example. There's a bank with a lot next to it that is paved for parking. So that would be considered a developed lot, not a vacant lot. Next slide, please. So the next type of site we can qualify is a vacant zoned non-residential, so a commercial lot, which allows residential. And we do not have, to my knowledge, any vacant commercial sites. Many of our vacant commercial sites that we would assume are vacant, they have parking or some other type of minor use on them, so they cannot qualify as vacant. Next slide, please. We do have throughout Capitola an abundance of underutilized non-vacant sites, both residential and commercial. So it's really what our focus is going to be on as we're going through our sites inventory. Here I'm showing 2 sites. The one on the left is 970 41st Avenue. It's next to a bank on 41st Avenue. It is a separate parcel and it has parking on it that I believe is associated with the bank. But I'm not 100% sure, but in talking with Veronica today, there is the ability for us to look at that site, and they would just have to reconfigure things and also make findings. Banks these days, a lot of people utilize their ATM, they utilize computer banking. I can't remember the last time I walked into my bank. So they will accept that the bank count for parking counts for banks is now much lower than it has been in the past. That's one site along 41st Avenue. The next site at 1408 and a half 41st Avenue that we're showing is the ski and outdoor furniture store. And when you go behind that building, it's quite long, the site, and there's a lot of parking and a small structure on the back. So again, there's a lot more space on this site than is utilized, and it could be a great site for redevelopment of putting some residential above. Next slide. Also, under our underutilized non-vacant sites, under the new laws that were created this past legislative session, are educational sites and congregational sites. So we've included in our sites inventory, we tried not to push any limits here, but to be practical, and we know that housing for our educational providers is in great need. And so on the Jade Street parcel, we're suggesting on the very back corner, the possibility, there's kind of a dirt lot there of up to 8 sites within our sites inventory. And then showing the congregational sites. You're allowed to build quite a bit of redevelop on congregational sites under the new law. I do not recall what we did for our estimate on that, but that's one type of site that we can also show. Next slide, please. You can also look at city-owned or leased sites. So here I'm showing the Pack Cove lots. This right now is not included in our sites inventory. We will talk about, you've heard us bring up no net loss before, that when a developer is coming in and if they want to underdevelop what we have associated with their site within the site's inventory, we have to be able to show that there are other sites that if they want to underdevelop. I strategically think that the reason why we have not included this in our sites inventory is that if we were ever in a situation that we needed a negotiation tool, or if a great project came in and our densities are too high within our affordable housing, we could always look to this city-owned site. And also there's other sites, one close to the highway on Bay Avenue that could also be a no net loss finding if we needed to find another vacant site in Capitola or underutilized. Next. And then sites zoned for non-residential use, so commercial use that can be redeveloped for residential use. On this slide, I'm showing on 38th Avenue, the Agility bouldering that just came in. It's a really large site, and the building on there is a climbing gym. 38th is primarily residential throughout until you get to the Kings Plaza area. So this site in just what could be an area that in our new zoning code, we actually allow commercial, we consider mixed use. Commercial can have, it doesn't have to be just vertical with residential on top. The residential can be on the same parcel. And this could be a good one to have a residential project behind Agility boulders. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to pass it back to Veronica.
Okay. The challenge with identifying sites this round is compounded by the significant changes in state law in what constitute a site. And essentially, because we have very few vacant sites, the new state law AB 1397 that was passed in 2017 says that if you rely more than half of your lower income RHNA on non-vacant sites, your sites inventory is subject to a higher standard of feasibility analysis. And we also have to make sure that we have substantial evidence that existing uses are not going to impede future development or redevelopment of the sites. So when we're looking at how to identify sites, we look at what are the existing uses. Are the existing uses consistent with the type of uses that are being redeveloped in the region? For example, we talked about banks. We see a lot of bank closures because the need for physical banks is not that much anymore. We've also seen a lot of single-use buildings that with a large parking. That's also because that type of uses are not very resilient to any kind of economic change. And we also see age and condition of the structures being a factor. Buildings older than 30, 40 years old are usually requiring some kind of substantial systems upgrade typically, and buildings that are older than 30 years usually are not complying with ADA requirements, and therefore if you want to do any kind of modernization, it makes complying with ADA sometimes is a constraint. We also looked at degree of underutilization, just like Katie mentioned, like the existing lot coverage, the existing floor area ratio compared to what is allowed in that zone. Developer owner's interest, those are also key factors in whether the site could be redeveloped or not. Sometimes we do have to look at existing leases, properties that have long leases with major anchors, stores that have long leases may be a constraint if they're not able to renegotiate the lease and therefore be able to develop the site. So all of these factors really helped us in understanding what would be appropriate in Capitola, what could be redeveloped over the next 8 years. But it is challenging to look at sites and make sure that you can make the finding that with substantial evidence that existing uses are not going to impede development.
Question.
Yes.
So the map that we have with the red outlines, those are all the possible sites based on all these restrictions. Those are the only ones that we can qualify that would be approved by HDC.
Those are the sites that we've kind of identify as potential, but we certainly welcome your comments. If you have anybody has local knowledge about, specific properties that we're not aware of. And certainly we welcome that. We may need to take it off because of something that we are not privy to, but we can, if you know of any other sites that you feel are good sites, we can also test it against the factors that we are looking at too.
Okay, but in general, like you looked along 41st Street and said, oh gosh, we can't do residential over retail because of maybe the long lease, right? Or
Exactly. And I think you as very active community members, any insight you have on any sites out there, if you know that a lease is about to end and that there's a possible vacancy coming up, that's helpful. And also if you look at the map and say, wow, I know that Kohl's has a 20-year lease. Why have they identified that as a site? So that's the kind of feedback we want. So again, this is very much the first draft, and we're looking for your guidance on this as well as from the public comments on this. So, but our first run through, this is the criteria we were looking at based on looking at the entire city for sites.
I have a follow-up question. Why, can you hear me better? Now I know Alexander why it's hard over here. This is a hard one. Why are you suggesting more? Why have you identified more than what's required?
Thank you. Yes. So right now we're at 1,600, a little over 1,600 sites, and that's almost a 19%. I think it's a little over 19% of our RENA requirement. We're looking for more so that if a developer comes in and we have them, I'm going to give the example of 100 units. If we have them at 100 units that they could provide within our sites inventory, but the economic sense for them is maybe to do a little more commercial and they only want 50 units. If we were right at our number of 1336, we would have to go look for that other 50 units on another site to add to our site's inventory. By having an overabundance of sites, we're alleviated from that stress. An applicant can come in, they can develop under what we're projecting, and we can make the findings of no net loss within our site's inventory.
And are we not concerned that in 8 years, when we get our new allocation, our new RENA numbers, that more are going to be that another 1,000 is going to be asked of us?
Well, the RENA methodology is a black box. We all know that, but generally is not dependent on your local capacity. The RENA is developed based on the statewide growth, and then allocated to the region and allocated to the county, and then to individual jurisdictions, primarily based on this round, this new 6th cycle round of state law. It's based primarily on access to jobs, access to high quality transit, and also there was new state law that made us go back to make up for the housing that was not constructed over the past 29 years or so. And so that's the reason why your RENA number is so large this time. So there's no guarantee next time what is going to be the RENA, but usually what is in your site inventory for capacity is not a factor that they look at in terms of allocating the RENA.
Okay. Yeah, I just fear that it's harder to argue that there's not many sites when we over identify, and if we're asked to do more in 8 years or with the next cycle. So it's just something I'm thinking of.
And just to supplement Katie's response about the no net loss, if in the event that you have just about the right number for your site inventory, a project comes in and proposes less or less units of affordable, you cannot approve the project without making a finding that either you have a replacement site available at that time, or that you will rezone or upzone another site within 6 months. So the burden is on you, not on the developer who's proposing less. And so that's something that you only have 6 months time to deal with that situation at that time. So.
But I thought that's why you have Pacific Cove and your other buffer zones. So we could aim closer to 1336 because we have those buffer zones.
But then wouldn't we have
So-
to rezone them at that time?
So that, though, there are some, we don't want to put everything in our sites inventory. So we also want to think about our entry corridors and future uses. So in our city hall, I think it's really important that we study this site and do some long-term planning for city hall and the parking lots before we decide that this is going to be included in the sites, which we can add to at any time. But it's also good to have more of a buffer in case. I'm thinking of actually the larger developments at the mall. We have 852 units, and in that scenario, if they came in at a much lower number and we needed to find additional sites, that's where I was thinking that this might be a buffer. But where we're at right now, we've got a surplus of about 300.
And I think the state recommends between 15 to 30% of a buffer for the lower and moderate income. What I also want to kind of mention too, if your site's inventory is very tight, they'll probably scrutinize your parcels more than if you have a little bit more of a room too.
But that's okay to be, I mean, I think that's why we're going through this process to ensure that that all the sites are, that we can build on them. And so I don't know if that's really an issue for at least me at this time.
No, I think I'm just a little confused about saving some of the properties as buffers for in the future, not including them in the site's inventory. Because it would seem to me, for example, I refer to it as the Red Tree property by the freeway. If that was included, that's a pretty large site and would add a significant number to our housing numbers. And I guess I don't quite understand why that wouldn't sit better with HCD for us to have those additional units in there now.
Getting the right size of a buffer is more an art than a science. One of the reasons for being, not as aggressive about the buffer too is, again, new state law.
Yeah.
If you are reusing a site in your housing element, if you have used a site in your housing element as one of the sites for your low income RHNA, and it doesn't get developed, and you want to reuse it next round, that site is subject to by right without discretionary review if the project includes 20% affordable. And that applies to the fifth cycle reuse sites too. If you reuse sites from the fifth cycle if they were sites identified for lower income and we're using it back as lower income, those sites are subject to by right approval without discretionary review. So we don't want to include too many sites so that then next round, when you want to use them again, then they become by right sites.
So if we have a suggestion of a site that's not included in your inventory that we think would be a good site, do you want those? Should we just send those to Katie and you guys will evaluate them?
Yeah, I think what we want to do is do a balance of what is more likely to be developed and therefore would not become a reuse site in the future, but still allows us have an adequate and a healthy buffer. So it's again, I think it's just looking at the different sites and ranking them probably like what is more likely to happen and what likely could become a reuse sites in the future.
Thank you.
I have a question. Regarding the buffer, if we did minimize the buffer, would that increase the possibility that our housing element would then be rejected and increase the possibility of missing the deadline?
Well, this is actually a harder question to answer than it seems. We are confident that we can adopt the housing element by the end of the year. And that's the statutory deadline for adopting it. HCD review and certification is a matter entirely on their hands. And they have told us that for this six cycle round, it's unrealistic to think that you can get through HCD with less than 3 rounds of review by them. And if you look at the state, look at ABAG, only 2 out of the 109 jurisdictions that actually adopted the housing element and got certified on time. I think as of now, there are still only about 6 or 9 housing elements out of 109 jurisdictions that are certified. Their deadline was January 1st, 31st. If you look at the state, SCAG region, 196 jurisdictions, and the housing element deadline was October 15, 2021. As of right now, only 52% of the jurisdictions have certified housing element. Look at SANDAG region, San Diego region, 19 jurisdictions. Their housing element was due April 15, 2021. As of now, only 8 jurisdictions have certified housing element.
I think she answered your question.
So our goal is to present the best housing element that we can and make sure that we meet the adoption deadline and work really hard with them to get to certification as soon as possible. So
we just have to adopt by the end of the year. It doesn't have to be certified.
The goal, ideally, it would be to certify it by the end of the year, but it's very unlikely because, and I'm being honest here, because every round of review by HCD, the first round takes 90 days, the second round takes 60 days, and the third round takes another 60 days. There in itself, there are not too many 60 days in a year. And so, I think what we want to do is present the best shot we can get to get as close to certification as possible.
Can you just not to drive home a point that's already been driven home about how important it is that we get this approved here and certified in time, but just for those that are listening and for those of us here at the dais, can you speak to the builder's remedy that we're going to be subject to if we don't approve this on time and what that means for us as a city?
Okay. The builder's remedy is a very archaic provision of the government code under the Housing Accountability Act. It's been in place since the 1980s. Nobody has ever used it. It has not been tested in court. It has not been used until this round, the 6 cycle housing element, because we do have a housing crisis. It is a large arena. It's very difficult for jurisdictions to get through the housing element. So now we are seeing developers using builder's remedy. But builder's remedy is really just a finding. It's a finding that you cannot use to deny an affordable housing project. If you do not have a certified housing element, you cannot use this particular finding to deny an affordable housing project based on the fact that that project does not comply with local general plan and zoning standards. So that's just a finding. So what would likely happen is the case in Santa Monica, a developer owns about 15 sites and he wants to build all of that up, and then he wants to, it's not following city zoning and development standards, but because of Santa Monica at that time didn't have a housing element certified, he claims that he can just build. And so that's builder's remedy, is a finding that you cannot make to deny an affordable housing project. Under builder's remedy, an affordable housing project is defined as a project that sets aside at least 20% of the units as affordable to lower income or 100% to moderate income households. Now, builder's remedy is not approval by right. It's just that you cannot deny the project. It still has to go through CEQA. it still has, it still gives you the ability to do discretionary review. So under Housing Accountability Act, SB 330, you can have up to 5 public hearings still. So it's not the same as the reuse sites that I talked about. That's approval by right. Builder's remedy does not have provision that exempts the project from CEQA or discretionary review.
I had a question you may have already told us, but so these places that you've identified on the map, do they meet all these factors, or this is just the jumping off point and then we're going to figure out if they meet these factors?
Thank you, Mayor. Our intention was that they would meet all these factors. I did learn today as we drove around and we looked at a few sites. Veronica kind of said, Katie, I don't know about this one over here. I don't think this is going to meet. So there are some on Capitola Road that will probably be removed that do not, there's 2-story office buildings that really don't meet the criteria. They're most likely have great leases. They look like newer, like they're well upkept buildings that will be taking some off. The DMV is on the current list. I'd like to keep it on the current list because it's a state building. Just let the state tell us to take that one off because they've got some some area within Capitola, I think, just for the premise of saying you've tasked us with 1,300 units. You should at least consider your site, but that will most likely come off. There's another site along 41st Avenue where Sweet Peas is. It's next to Burger King. That was a mistake. We caught that today when we were out in the field. Like that's a 3-story, well-utilized structure. So we're more looking for underutilized. So we do feel confident about the majority, though, that you are seeing on this on the map.
So the potential for the buffer to be reduced is there.
It is.
Okay.
And hopefully if there's other recommendations, we're really looking forward to looking at those. And you'll notice on our map, there are X's, and those are sites we've looked at and considered, but for one reason or another, they did not comply with this list. So I think we'll move ahead. I think the next slide is, we've pretty much discussed most of these points here, but really we're going to be looking at each site individually and going through this analysis. If you can click, the main point here is what we need to do is identify for the sites in order to say how they can develop. We need to look at trends and we need to understand our existing densities in Capitola. So I'm going to go through a series of slides with you. I'm going to do it fast because it's 7 and I want to make sure you all have time to talk and give input. So the next series of slides are locations within Capitola and their existing density. You have a corresponding map that you can take home tonight. So this is the map, but we'll just move on to the next slide. So each site the address is there, the density. So this is 850 Rosedale. The density is 21.3 dwelling units per acre. I just want you to understand visualizing density. It's really hard to look at different buildings and understand exactly what the density is. And I think it really, when a building is nicely designed, it can have a lot of density in it and it can look really impressive. So this is just understanding Capitola's density. So 850 Rosedale, 21.3 dwelling units per acre. Next slide. 750 Bay Avenue, 22.7 dwelling units per acre. It's a beautiful development. Next slide. Jade Street and Ruby Court and 45th. This is also this house is 348 units. It has a 2-story look to it, and it has a density of 22.8 dwelling units per acre. 1925 46th Avenue, the villas at Capitola. The density here is 23.8. So we're increasing with density for every slide. Next slide, please. 900 Capitola Avenue. This is at 25 dwelling units per acre. 4820 Opal Cliffs Drive, so right at the entry to Capitola, we're almost at 30. They're at 28 dwelling units per acre. Slide. 1066 41st Avenue. This is the Capitola Beach Villas, relatively new project. This is actually what we're basing our mall development on because it is mixed use and it's on 41st Avenue corridor at 29.4 dwelling units per acre. Next slide. 850 and 870 Park Avenue, 32 dwelling units per acre. Now, I wonder if I asked, do you think this project is more dense than the smaller structures next to it? There's two smaller. Susan's saying no, this is less dense. Would you all, do you know, there's two structures and smaller, so we'll get to that. Next, this is 32. This is the Capitola Avenue, the Capitola Mansion, 34 dwelling units per acre. 501 Plum, 51 units. It's at 37.6 dwelling units per acre. 1945 42nd Avenue. This is very dense, 38 dwelling units per acre. And here we are. This is the other property on Balboa, 1825 Balboa. This is at 41 dwelling units per acre. So it to me looks a lot smaller than the buildings next door. It has a lot to do with the design and the breaking up the buildings, but it has a similar look. So it's funny the difference between from 32 dwelling units per acre to 41. And it really all is in the design and the layout. So with that, I think that concludes our density. I have these slides if you're interested. So we've already gone over affirmatively furthering fair housing, but really the message here is that we need to spread out our locations throughout all of Capitola. So next slide, please. So here's the good news. In this exercise and in all of Brett's hard work of doing all these calculations and the spreadsheet that comes behind these maps, we've discovered that based on our existing densities and because we do not have density limits, so within our commercial zones and our mixed use zones, we do not have density limits. That provides a lot of flexibility to a developer. They can come in with single room occupancy units that are really small. They can come in with a one room suite. They can come in with a 3-bedroom apartment. It provides a lot of flexibility. And what it means is they have a lot of flexibility in their densities. And so by showing our trends through the slides I just showed you, we have proof that in Capitola, you can develop at higher densities. And therefore, I'm really happy to report we do not have to do a rezone with the housing element update. So at our first meetings before getting through this exercise, we were thinking we'd have to do a rezone and track with this. We can do a rezone if there's any properties that you would like, but it takes rezones. There's a lot of CEQA analysis that goes into it. It costs additional money. And it also, like to say, no good decision is made in a hurry. And especially when it comes to a beautiful place like Capitola. So if we are thinking about rezoning and we want to rezone, we now have the ability to take our time. This, however, is not the final map. And if in the final map, we don't quite have the numbers we need, we may still need to rezone. Because I said, Veronica, we definitely don't need to rezone this. And she says, well, it depends on the final map, not the map we have in front of us tonight. So, but hopefully, and within those zones, those properties are subject to height standards, floor area ratio, parking, and our new objective standards, as well as open space. I didn't list everything. But, next slide. So with that, we have our map. And you've all had your map at home. We've printed out large copies for you to take home. We also have a zoning map for you to take home and the streets map that was requested. But this is really what we want to hear about tonight is and just feedback on this map. We'd love to hear we'll take public comment. And then I think we've answered a lot of questions. I'm happy to answer more questions before we go to public comment. And then the opportunity to hear from all planning commissioners and all city council members to understand what you think about this first pass on the map, what things you'd like to see improved, what things we should further study. So we're really looking forward to hearing your comments tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. We will go to questions first, if there are any left over.
I have one.
Yeah.
So thinking about some of these some of these projects being proposed, and the end game is that they actually get built, right? So, I mean, this is the whole point. Do we, in the submission, when we turn this in, because we want it to be approved, is it something that we need to discuss or make suggestions on incentivizing things being built? I know we have a lot of incentives in our zoning code, right? Is that the right? Yeah. But I don't know if we need anything here for this particular.
So that will be part of the housing element update. So when we release the first draft, there will be discussions on what incentives exist and what's standing in the way of housing too. So what impediments do we need to kind of remove from our development process to assist and make it more incentivized? So that will be a part of it. It's not part of this map exercise, but a very important part of the housing element update.
Okay, so I'll leave that here where I heard you mention 15% or the buffer zone. You know, if we decide that we want to minimize that buffer zone to the 15%, which would be the minimum suggestion, then we should talk about those incentives and so that would make our proposal more likely to be approved instead of going through, being denied. So that's just what I was thinking. Okay, got it.
Any other questions?
A question, when you were evaluating the sites, like for example, on the Capitola Road sites like 41, 42, those all ones there in the row. When you identify those, that is just lots of potential development, right? That could be developed. Did anybody, or was it evaluated if different projects come in and how parking would be affected or those areas? Not that, because we can't control what developer will come in, but looking at those sites, what the impact of surrounding neighborhoods would be around that or projected what it could be?
Not at this stage. So, there's it's something that's another good point to bring up. So we were talking about what are some of our challenges going to be in this housing element update, and talking about what stands in the way of a developer developing. As you know, more recently we've had an affordable housing project go through that they proposed one site per unit. That's a huge impact on our neighbors, on the neighborhood. That's the trend of state law right now, is to allow waivers and concessions. But in looking at our future sites, the majority of our neighborhoods are impacted by parking. So it is going to be something that as developments come in, we really need to start thinking about what we can do within our street right-of-ways, or what are incentives so that developers come to the table with parking. And usually one answer to that, if you want more parking on site, usually you have to let a little more height in order to get a parking garage on the first story and allow for more units. So there's really this give and get scenario that happens with when you're thinking about incentives, and also making sure that housing development is responsible and they have parking on site for their residents. But at this juncture, we've not analyzed these sites in correlation to on-site parking or street parking issues.
And I think one thing I just want to supplement too, again, we're identifying sites that currently allows housing without rezoning. So whether they're identified in the housing element as a site inventory site or not, they are allowed to develop based on your general plan and zoning regardless. So I think that needs to be clear. It's not that because you're identified in the housing element, therefore you will be allowed to build, because we are identifying only sites right now that's currently zoned. So whether it's in the housing element or not, the site will be allowed to develop based on your general plan and zoning.
So since about 2/3 of our entire plan is based on the mall, and we've had previous proposals, associated with the mall, and we've assumed maximum density of, roughly 30 units per acre. What do we assess the feasibility of each CD accepting that?
I believe the mall owner, I'm not, do we have participants on Zoom this evening? Because they might be here to comment, actually. So we do. So I they may speak to it tonight during public comment and then, but I think they are agreeable to what we're showing now, if not wanting more.
Mhm.
If.
Oh, sorry.
Microphone. Thank you. What's the potential? I don't know if this is already spoken about, but what's the potential of further densifying some of these that are already at capacity with, I mean, the blue outline? If you were to put in additional housing within, already dense sites, but is that?
So I think so the scenarios that we've shown, within the sites that are already developed.
Yeah.
We actually show a few of these as further developed. Actually, maybe we actually show in our sites inventory if there's available land area, it's likely that it could be redeveloped. I would like to. We can talk about 700 Park.
I'm gonna sound like a broken record. New state law. Again, in 2017, the state really passed I think 32 housing bills in one session. And a lot of them is relating to the site inventory. One of that is the replacement housing requirement. If you are building, if you're using a site for your arena that has existing units on it, then as a condition of project approval, the development must replace all units that were occupied by low-income households or deed restricted for low income, not just deed restricted, but occupied. Like it can be either one or. So it can be a market rate housing, but as long as it's occupied by low income households, the developer is obligated to replace those units for affordable housing and deed restrict them. And because of that, I question the wisdom of that law because it really is and major impediment to redeveloping some of these older multifamily development that may be past its prime and maybe aging and so signs of disrepair. But because of this replacement requirement, it makes it very financially difficult.
Right. I think
that's why some of the projects when we're looking at the sites inventory, we look at only the portions of the sites that can be considered as like buildable, or by removing limited number of lower intensity structures and create some kind of buildable area to intensify it. But ultimately, that type of intensification doesn't give you as much capacity as you had wished.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions before we go to public comment?
I have a question. What kind of pushback can we have to the state? I know there's some cities that are doing this. We have no vacant places to build anything. We're not Vacaville where there's endless amounts of land. So what can we do? Why can't we use granny flats and ADUs since we do not have open space? So I was wondering if those things have been addressed or if some cities are actually going out to see if they can change some things.
We would be in violation of our housing element and builder's remedy, which we were just discussing of builders can come in and apply for applications for higher density than is allowed. And there's also by right planning that happens if we're in violation. So then if we were in violation, there'd be an automatic by right approval of up to 20 units per acre on any site that I don't want to get this wrong, but that has up to 20% affordable component on it.
But I think one thing that last Thursday, the Attorney General just filed a lawsuit against the city of Huntington Beach for their ADU ordinance, I think, or something similar. Or, no, actually for prohibiting SB 9. And so the housing element is the most litigated element of the general plan. In the event of a lawsuit, you do lose land use control. The court can zone the land for you. And you could lose permitting control. And when you do lose permitting control, it's not just residential building permit, it's every kind of building permit. I did have a client that was sued on their emergency shelters ordinance and was not allowed to even issue building permits for home repair. The planning director had to go to court for that homeowner because it was a health and safety issue to get the court to allow that repair to proceed. So it could go pretty severe if you do, and it gets more these days given the direction of the state. But I think the good thing is we think we can get there and without rezoning. And if you do see properties that you think is appropriate to rezone, we can always do it too. If we have the adequate sites with a healthy but lower buffer, if necessary, that we get the housing element through. And if you do want to deal with rezoning for appropriate sites later on, you do it at your own pace.
I would like to get to public comment because I think.
Can I ask one more question? I just want to clarify. You said the builder's remedy has never been challenged in court. Did you say that?
Because it was never used until this time.
So are there any pending?
There are, well, there's no lawsuit at this time, but there are projects that are being processed as builder's remedy. The biggest one or the first one is the city of Santa Monica, as I mentioned before, a developer that owns about 14 or 15 sites, and then he's proposing 1,500 units. Then there is one project that was relatively big file for the city of Oakland, but the city of Oakland was ultimately able to get the housing element certified before the developer filed the application, or the application was deemed complete. There are other builders remedies projects out there, but I don't think there is a lawsuit on builders remedy yet.
Okay, let's take this out to the public. I think we have some in-person comments.
I apologize for taking your time if this is not relevant. Excuse me, but this would require rezoning, and I didn't hear anything about industrial zones. There is property right behind our mobile home park, between the mobile home park and the highway, which is right now occupied by Earthworks and Glacier Ice. And when they moved in, they promised to be good neighbors. They put up a sound wall, and they have not honored the noise ordinances pretty much ever since they've moved in. There's crazy loud noises at 3 a.m, 4 a.m. I've called the police, and they hide from the police and then start the noise back up as soon as the cops can't find them. You know, I mean, it's just been crazy. And it got to the point where we all just ignore it. Nobody's really even complaining anymore. But they've been terrible neighbors. So it would require rezoning. And I didn't hear you guys mention an industrial zone. So I don't even know if this is a viable suggestion, but I thought I would mention it briefly, because you guys have been here a long time, and I know you have other people that want to speak. But the address is 310A Kennedy Drive. It's right between Rosedale Avenue and Chittenden Lane. And it's industrial currently, and they're very, very loud and have been for years. Really crazy loud. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other in-person comments on this item? Seeing none, we can take it online.
The first public speaker from Zoom is going to be Kalisha Webster. Kalisha, I've allowed you to speak. If you could unmute yourself, you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, council members and commissioners.
My name is Kalisha Webster, and I'm the Senior Housing Advocate at Housing Choices, a nonprofit service provider that has been helping people with developmental and other disabilities to find and retain affordable housing for the past 25 years. I want to first thank staff and the consultant for this thorough overview of the housing element update process. As we all know, California is in the midst of a housing and homelessness crisis, making jurisdictions' response to the housing element update process extremely important as we determine how to best meet the overwhelming need within our communities. As we've seen in other jurisdictions in Southern California and the Bay Area who are further along in the update process, HCD has made it clear that jurisdictions are being held to a higher standard than ever before, not only to make sure they have zoning capacity to meet their designated RHNA, but also to affirmatively further fair housing for the most vulnerable residents. The requirement to affirmatively further fair housing must be guided by an assessment of fair housing based on local data and community input and considered throughout the development of the housing element, including programs and policies, housing needs analysis, and the site's inventory. While rezoning may not be necessary to meet the RHNA on paper, realistically, significant incentives will be needed to encourage housing development if cities remain in compliance throughout the cycle of RHNA cycle, as the city had only built 56 units of housing as of the 2021 annual progress report. For people with developmental disabilities who have had few options to live inclusively in the community due to the lack of extremely low income housing available, and many other special needs groups on fixed or limited incomes, some of whom you have heard from today during oral communications, at greatest risk of homelessness or displacement, what is most needed is programs and policies which will incentivize more extremely low income housing development near transit, jobs, and other community amenities. While HCD has not specified a RHNA for ELI housing, they do provide guidance for jurisdictions to assume at least 50% of the very low income allocation should be planned as extremely low income. In addition, the passage of AB 2094 will require jurisdictions to start reporting the number of ELI units being built in its annual housing element progress reports to HCD. As the city develops its programs and policies for inclusion in the housing element, we hope to see firm commitments to implement programs with specific timelines and measurable outcomes as required by HCD to increase the production of extremely low income housing in the city of Capitola. These units should be not only SROs, studios and one bedrooms, but also larger units for people with disabilities on fixed incomes, needing a larger unit for a living caregiver, or for those choosing to live with roommates or family members. Thank you.
Thank you.
The following speaker is in Zoom and listed as staff is their name on their Zoom account. I've allowed you to speak. You'll have 3 minutes once you unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, my name is Ralph Sonnenfeld. I was just calling in to make a few suggestions. First off, I believe the most of the elementary schools in the city are on the east side of Soquel, the Soquel Creek, and so I'd encourage the city to focus a lot on adding more affordable housing to the east side of Soquel Creek, not just the 41st Avenue corridor, where I think we all recognize there's a lot of opportunity, and especially to affirmatively further fair housing. I hope that the city really takes advantage of the new tool available to it, Senate Bill 10, which was passed a couple years ago, which allows you to more quickly facilitate redevelop or rezoning of small parcels. You can rezone them up to 10 units, and you could do that throughout the relatively low density areas to allow more sort of like naturally occurring missing middle housing to happen, and allow more conversions of smaller parcels into small apartment buildings. I think there will be some interesting changes to building code coming up over the next few years that will make those sorts of projects more feasible. And I also wanted to recommend, as we're thinking about having more transit-oriented development, Over the long term, I believe the city of Capitola is poised to have a light rail station and should really consider planning now to add more density along the corridor where that light rail station is likely to be. And I think you can look up RTC plans where that's going to happen. Overall, I think there's a lot of opportunity on 41st Avenue, but putting most of our affordable housing on one corridor doesn't really pass the smell test when it comes to affirmatively furthering fair housing. We really want to be integrating our community and providing more opportunity in the places that are closest to schools and parks and things like that. So that's I again just wanted to encourage the city to.
I'm so sorry, that was your time. That's 3 minutes. The next speaker is going to be John Mullery. John, you have been allowed to speak. If you could just unmute yourself, you'll have 3 minutes.
Hey guys. So when I look at this map, I echo what Rafa said about the schools and how we are really putting everything just in one area. My concern more is passing HCD. So a lot of these sites you're using here, we use in the 4th and 5th cycle, and people are going to write letters to HCD explaining this, and the standards are much higher now for reusing sites like this. And I just find I'm briefly looking at this. I find it almost impossible to believe that this isn't going to end up going to a second, probably even a third draft if this is genuinely what we're planning to do. If we go to a third draft, that's going to put us well past the AMBAG deadline. So we're going to be open to builder's remedy that entire time, because the grace period is more a grace period than it actually is and a time when builder's remedy doesn't apply. I'm also very curious why we didn't do much on Capitola Ave. That's our other commercial area. It's very low density, but it's got a lot of areas that are just essentially parking lots and one-story commercial buildings. That's a perfect place to put mixed-use projects. In particular, I'm thinking of 520-ish to 524 Capitola Ave. That's basically empty buildings and empty parking lots. So yeah, I'd love you to consider that, but really consider the not reusing sites we've already used twice in a row, because that's just everywhere else jurisdictions have done that. They have not gotten approval. So I don't see why we would get approval in that situation. Thank you so much, and good luck.
The next speaker is going to be Jane Barr. Jane, if you could please unmute yourself, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time this afternoon. I'm Jane Barr with Eden Housing, and I just wanted to comment that you've got a really hard task in front of you, and I do appreciate the thoroughness of your report tonight. I think your consultants have done a great job working with the city, and I support your efforts to meet Urena and think you're on the right path. Thank you.
There are no other hands raised on Zoom.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to take it back to the commission and the council, allowing the planning commission to start off with any thoughts, recommendations other than what has already been talked about.
I've got 3.
Yeah, go for it.
So the comment about distributed housing throughout the community versus focusing on 41st Street, isn't there a philosophy, again, the one community density book or the community textbook I've read talks about densities, and there was someone on the last meeting we had talked about it's good to have density breeds more density, and that's a good thing. Is that the philosophy you're bringing forward, or is there some sort of again, philosophy that you're trying to adhere to from like a textbook sort of a philosophy that says, here's where we should have density?
Yeah, yes, I mean, that's part of it, is where are our major corridors for transportation? How can we decrease our vehicle miles traveled? And that is by developing in mixed use areas. So that is good planning principles. And also we have a characteristic on the east side that we've got a lot of single family residential neighborhoods. In those areas, I think it's realistic. We have to show that this can be accomplished. I don't think we could go to a block of single family property owners and see if they want to become multifamily and redevelop in the near future. I don't think we'd get a yes. You know, if we thought that that approach would work, we would put it into this document. But so really in our single family neighborhoods, which are on the east side, you'll see more, will be depending on ADUs and SB 9. But otherwise, if there are more sites along Capitola Avenue or Bay Avenue on the east side, we're happy to look at those as well.
So my second item is follows up on that. So when the gentleman mentioned Senate Bill 10 and, you know, the rezoning small parcels for you know, up to 10 units, you're saying that that's not a reasonable approach to incorporate anything like that in the housing plan, because that's like basically you'd have to show a trend or something.
So Capitola's single family neighborhoods are extremely dense. Our typical lots are 40 by 80 square feet. That equates to 12 units per acre. So that's actually higher than our low density in our multifamily zones. So therein lays the problem of utilizing an SB 10 and allowing up to 10 dwelling units on a site. Our sites are very small. Within our mixed use neighborhoods and community commercial, we don't have density limits. So we really don't need to adopt the SB 10 strategy, because if the lot is large enough to have 10 units, and then they could have 10 units on a site.
But you couldn't figure that into your RHNA number, saying, assuming that certain houses are going to convert to 10 unit apartments.
And we have, within our RHNA numbers, within all the highlighted sites, we've based it on the trends within that zone of, can you go to the, I think it's 2 slides. Oh, no, in the other direction, sorry. So within our assumptions, for each zoning district, we have assumptions. So within the mixed use neighborhood, you see that our, let's see, we've got a assumed max density of 20 dwelling units per acre. That's based on what's been developed in our mixed use neighborhoods. And then we've taken 70% off of that. So we're saying our realistic density is 17 dwelling units per acre. So all the assumptions, any site you see in the mixed use neighborhood, our assumption is that they could build up to 17 dwelling units per acre. So that is in the equation, which Brett puts together in the background of that kicks out these numbers based on the site. He looks at how big is the site in the mixed use neighborhood based on 17 dwelling units per acre. So for regional commercial, we go a little higher. The assumed max density is at 30 dwelling units per acre, but then we take it down to 70% of that, which is 21 dwelling units per acre. So we're basing these numbers on pre-developed sites. Does that answer your
no,
question?
that's very helpful. So basically, you kind of his concern or his question is kind of baked into your calculations.
It is.
So, and then my final question, sorry to take up so much time, is the comment that was made about rezoning industrial. It seems to me that we're in a hurry to get this approved, to get it to the HCD in plenty of time, because we're worried about the builder's remedy. And so we don't want to rezone because of that. But my thought is that maybe since the builder's remedy hasn't gone to court yet, we might keep an eye on that, and there might be something that happens in the next 6 months about the builder's remedy going to court that would give us an opportunity to breathe and maybe rezone and address this woman's concern about yeah, there's some areas that are currently industrial that maybe should be rezoned.
Yeah, I think that because it's more of an impact, a neighborhood impact, it's something that we should put on our list of, we're getting really good at zoning code cleanups, and that should go on the zoning code cleanup list rather than our sites inventory and housing element update. It's more of an impact between, just can we mitigate that? Can we build in future mitigations for permits? And it's also something that we can work with the neighbors. I didn't realize that was a problem happening at that site right now. So that is something we can take steps on as staff in writing letters and making sure they're compliant.
Independent of that issue, I mean, if you rezoned it, her point was that why not include that in your arena count, right? And we're not, because it's zoned industrial.
If I can just elaborate a little bit, kind of like went back to the workshop that we did before. Part of the reason for trying to either meet the rezone by the end of this year or to not rezone is because new state law. If you rezone properties for your arena, but your rezoning occurs past the statutory deadline of the housing element past December 31st this year, then those sites are considered what's called a shortfall sites. A shortfall sites are subject to by right approval without discretionary review if the project includes 20%. It also requires that you establish a minimum density for that zone. You cannot have no density limit on range. You have to have a minimum density of 20 units to the acre. So nobody can build below 20 units to the acre. You also need the size of the site has to be able to allow up to 16 units.
Can I interrupt you? Because your early point, I'm trying to follow you here. So you're saying that if we submit a map or a housing element, but we took extra time and we did it at the last minute and maybe included some industrial sites because we worked it hard. You're saying that the sites that we submitted would suddenly all become shortfall sites because we haven't hadn't got the HCD approval?
No. If the sites require rezoning and the rezoning occurs after December 31st this year, then that's considered a rezone site to meet your RHNA, and therefore subject to additional statutory requirements, which is 20% by right approval. Well, by right approval if 20% is low income and the site has to have a minimum density of 20 units to the acre, a maximum of whatever that range is, but the bottom of that range has to be 20 units to the acre. The site has to be large enough to accommodate at least 16 units. So these at least three requirements are added requirements if you cannot complete the rezoning before the end of the year.
So we would be penalized if not. And the other part of that is we actually, you'll see on the map on Kennedy, we were considering, there's actually a site on Kennedy. It's great. It's big. It has, I think, one, maybe two structures on it. It's a really large site. We've got 2 X's through those because that would require a rezone. And then we'd be, if we don't meet that deadline, it would penalize us until we've got that rezone done. So we're really, with the map that we've created now, we have removed sites that would require rezones just to protect the city. But point being, if you told me that you're interested in me looking at rezones in the long term, we can still do that. We just don't want to write that in our housing element so that HCD isn't saying we have to rezone in order to make our RHNA. But we can still, on a side track, I'm happy to work with Planning Commission and City Council towards rezoning specific properties. We just don't want to put that in our document.
And I have done housing elements where I have 2 programs. One program is adequate sites for RHNA. These are all the sites that we have. We don't require rezoning or the rezoning is already done. And then I have a separate program called additional opportunities for housing not subject to RENA. And that's where you can put in the things that you want to look at and take your time to do the rezoning.
And the advantage of that would be if you do have a developer coming in, he would have more sites and maybe he would, go to the industrial site, which would make more sense than jumping in the middle of a neighborhood where you have a lot of outraged neighbors. So that's why you do it in two. Okay. Thank you.
Are we just going down the line? I'm sorry. I just wanted to spin off of what the subject he was talking about.
Yeah, we can stay on subject. That's fine.
I just was curious as if we're looking at the long term and we have, more rounds of this coming around, like you're saying, identifying those sites, possible redevelopment of multifamily, creating further density on those parcels. And then also annexation down the line. I mean, like with that, I think it was not an elderly housing facility that was an application a few weeks ago. If they wanted to do something, say on Bulb Avenue, and we had an application and that came up again, that would be part of the longer term goal. Is that correct?
That's correct. So we have included the site that's within Capitola's jurisdiction in here for the Bulb Avenue, Capitola Road site for the assisted living facilities.
Gotcha.
So that one is in there. But yes, if we were to annex the property next door to help add to the density of that site, we can do that at this stage. We wouldn't be writing in our housing element that we need to do that to meet our RENA numbers. So that would also be something that we can go ahead and do, but it doesn't have to be under the purview of HCD.
Right. So for the short term, you're meeting your needs.
You do have to go through a process of annexation under RENA, that if you annex land from the unincorporated county area, you are obligated to negotiate with them to see how much of their RENA you're going to take from that property. So if that property currently is zoned for non-housing, then that shouldn't have any RENA associated with it. But if it's zoned for high density housing, for example, then you take the land, you take the RENA.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be sort of quick. So I work in Silicon Valley and I've watched with some amusement and some consternation those cities which are a year ahead of us, right? And so they've gone through a lot of machinations on this and have been rejected multiple times by HCD. So I'm very worried about the feasibility of the mall project. Can we make it work with the zoning we have now, with the height restrictions we have now, with the parking restrictions we have now, et cetera, or is the HCD going to say, because I've seen this in other Silicon Valley cities where they said that's just not a feasible project. Are we really, that's 64% of our eggs are in that basket.
Actually, a lot of my housing elements are being met with shopping centers redevelopment, which is a trend. Redondo Beach, a very similar community to you. We met the majority of the arena primarily on redevelopment of shopping centers. So it could happen. Culver City, another one of my housing elements, has redevelopment of shopping centers as part of the strategy. In fact, the majority again of the arena. It could happen, and I think you have a willing developer. I think in the future, in the next few months, is working, with some kind of agreement. What works, what would make that work, and we factored that into the housing element.
Right. So some cities, Mountain View, for example, took that approach, but they have a developer that's ready to do that. Do we have to get that developer on board to really prove our case? Or, again, we've been through this once before and we flunked.
So I before releasing this map, I did reach out to them all because this is a significant number. It's 850 units. Their original property proposal for the conceptual review back in 2019 had 637. So over 200 more units, and almost at 30 dwelling units per acre. They're fine with the number, was the feedback I got. We didn't get the opportunity to meet until this was actually published. So I met with them yesterday to discuss, and they're okay with the number. The message I do get from them all is that they would like to continue the conversation with Capitola and have more, more, like space. They would like some more reliability in what they're allowed to do there. It's funny, we've got this open density, right? So it seems like I think it's a great tool. It gives a lot of developer flexibility, but it also, I could see from their perspective, they'd like to know what would be approved by the city and what they could get approvals for. So we'll continue to talk with them, but at this point they're okay with the number. I don't think they also expressed interest if Capitola wants to place more on the mall. We're happy to discuss that. So I was hoping they'd have a representative to talk to you directly tonight, but that did not happen. Maybe we'll get a letter from them. But I think an important part of this, I know mall redevelopment is one of our goals, right? We've got a dying mall. I'm sure all of you, whenever you're out and about talking to the public, people ask, so what's going on at the mall? When is it going to redevelop? And it's been a goal in our general plan for years. We've done our zoning and incentivized it for mall redevelopment. And I think we'll continue in those efforts to support redevelopment at the mall. But that's also knowing that we can meet our numbers. We should start to have like a side conversation with the mall of how can we make that redevelopment happen. So that's something we can do alongside of updating our arena.
So I think you're looking for feedback, right? So maybe some.
Let all the.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that memo.
That's
Sorry.
Well, I think they've done an amazing job coming up with the various sites on the map. And when I first looked at it, I was concerned about how many of the sites are in the 41st Avenue area. And I think that one of the planning principles that really works is that not only do we want to do housing, but we do want to try and reduce vehicle miles traveled. That's another strong goal for the state to have happen. And so having housing close to where retail, shopping, and grocery stores are is very important. I do think we should look harder at sort of the Bay Avenue, Capitola intersection area, because we do have a lot of those resources there as well. Nob Hill, CVS, shopping on Capitola Avenue and in that area, so that we might be able to, balance things out a little more if we used more sites in that area and gave up a few other sites that could be difficult to develop or controversial. And personally, I have a list of a couple sites, and I will get those off to Katie and they can look at them. But overall, I think this is going in the right direction, and they've done a good job putting it together fairly quickly. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Jerry?
Yeah, I just have two questions. One question was, and just kind of tying on to a question that was brought up about Red Tree. When we look at the Red Tree property, and that's not highlighted or identified right now, and then like the one that says senior center, what was the logic behind those, just as we drive around and look for sites?
Sure. So the Red Tree site was really all about, this is our entryway into Capitola. It's part of the Nob Hill development. It's a great site for a potential many different uses. I could see a hotel located at our entryway, something for our gateway. And placing housing right on the on-off ramp maybe isn't the best place for housing, was one of the thoughts. But I do think it is if that's an area that you'd like us to study, we're happy to study. But I was also thinking a little more of our with my economic development hat on. And really, when you're arriving into a city, similar to when you get off the 41st exit, but it's a smaller scale on Bay Avenue, it's really got this, it hasn't even started to develop as a commercial site. So if it all became housing at this point, it would just have a different feel to it within our gateway, which is primarily commercial there. So just thinking that we should hold off on that until to see what other commercial or possible hotel development could happen on that site. That's more in alignment with what's there.
Thank you. And then just my one last question, with the buffer number, projected, 19 or 15, if we came in at 19 or 20, and then that they got approved, and 8 years from now, come back and you have to re-identify, and we already identified those, would it be then a new number on the top of that? Or so would that be an incentive for the buffer number to be as low as possible so that the next time these numbers come back, if it's another, hopefully it's not another 1,000, but if it was another 1,000 again, have you already identified them and then you'd have to find those again?
So we could reutilize the sites, but there's a penalty that comes with that of if it's a 20% affordable development, it's by right, or if it's 100% moderate income, it could be by right. So there's some penalties to that. When we will assess this a little further for you, because I think this is something that has come up quite a bit and it's a concern, because you're right, we don't want to get the buffer too big and hurt ourselves in our next RHNA. So we'll start thinking through that lens, because I think that's what I'm hearing. So, and then we'll bring back scenarios, which we can build in. We are going to have to submit, we'll have to get our public document out in April, but we can start having those conversations separately of how to strategize there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Council, Yvette, you want to start? Sure. So I think I'll start with the mall and the increase to numbers to units at the mall site. We've heard feedback about trying to spread out the projects that, throughout the city. And I'm just wondering, and this is just to take it's the food for thought about whether we can maintain the already approved council, the conceptual design of 636, and with all of the ideas that's been created by everyone here today, and look at whether that would be enough instead of raising the amount at the property. Just because my point is not that I'm not in support of in a larger number. I just don't want us to get ourselves in a situation where it's not possible. Especially with the current developer that we have. So you've heard already about the buffer. I think we can maintain that buffer still with the reduction of the units at the mall. I would ask for us to look at the ADUs. I see that we're suggesting 50. We keep talking about trends, but we literally just created the plans. It's new. It's hard to track trends when the average amount of development is 6 in Capitola for the last 6 years. So really, it's a weird trend to ask us. And I think we have some leverage there with the HCD to say we anticipate more over that 8 years time. So I would encourage us to increase that number there. And then with those slight modifications, I feel that we can still get our numbers met with the suggestions that are being brought forward today and these suggestions that I'm suggesting now. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure if that'll help. I'll try to speak up a little bit. Yeah, regarding the mall, I would be hesitant about lowering that number and be more interested in talking to Merlone Geyer and seeing if the number of 852 is enough to actually incentivize them to develop, because it's my understanding that the more housing units that they are allowed to develop there will create more economic incentive for them to redevelop. And we definitely don't want to limit them or give them the bare minimum. So I'd definitely like to see staff and Katie working closely with Merlone Geyer and finding out exactly what it will take to get that project moving, as it's been so long in the making. Additionally, I was curious if you could speak on 600 Park Avenue. and why it is not recommended for demolition or redevelopment, and instead is recommending for only building on the open space there, the 12 units, and not anything denser, because it is a very relatively low density area that I think has a great potential.
So 600 Park Avenue, we went out and we toured it today. And when you go through 600 Park Avenue, there's really not an abundance of open space on that site. It's a lot of, there's single family development, there's carports, there's a lot of circulation and road or driveway through, and kind of limited space in between. There is space in between, but not enough space in between to put many structures. When you, under the new housing law, so back to Veronica said you're going to get sick of the term new housing law, but under new housing law, in the past, we've had really great projections on that site because we didn't have to, you would, under the new law, for any unit that's in that site that's being occupied by somebody that would qualify for a lower income, you have to also not only produce the new housing development on site, but then rebuild all of those sites and deed restrict any unit that was occupied by low income. So the state has put this new requirement on there that is not that desirable for redevelopment for once they understand the requirements. So if you went in on that side, I think there's 80 units. In our previous housing cycles, we've looked at increasing it by an additional 50, so up to 130. And then in going through what is the reasonable exercise, that additional 50 units has dropped down to 30. So in previous cycles, and that was with removing structures and building new structures. So that was a phased approach to redevelopment. And in previous cycles, we were estimating 30. With the new law, how it is, and the impact that will have on a developer to reinvest into that site, we think it's more reasonable to just look at the small open space along Park Avenue. There's already a development trend that's pretty close to Park Avenue. So I think introducing one more building along Park Avenue wouldn't have the biggest impact. But there we were estimating based on the trends, we sized out what is the size in front of Park Avenue, how much square footage, and then based on current trends and density, we were estimating at 12 new units in that one little space. But really, when we go in front of HCD, we have to kind of make findings that what we're suggesting could really happen, and that would pass the test rather than the tear down rebuild. There are a lot of success stories in Capitola, though, I must say. So although that's what we're going to submit for our housing element, because that's what will pass the test at HCD, Bay Avenue Senior Center is a great success story about existing units and putting money in and redeveloping that site. I don't know if maybe one structure was removed in that process or if it's just one additional, but the net increase there was significant. The Bay Avenue, I believe, was one of the first affordable housing projects in Capitola. They reached their 45 or 50-year life expectancy, and a lot of money and cooperation between nonprofits and the city was put into that site. So that investment, there are stories out there, and hopefully that's something that can happen to Park Avenue. But for the exercise we're going through for what will be approved by HCD, that's the reason why we're putting 12. But our hope would be that
is that
partnership
realistic possible growth of only 30 units due to the fact that the property is restricted by density per acre and height?
For the Park
Because
Avenue?
It seems like, for that, I mean, if you built it 2 stories or 3 stories, it seems like realistically it would be a lot more than an additional 30 units for 600 Park.
Yeah, so right now we're only estimating for it's 0.6 of an acre right along the frontage in that open space that would redevelop. And we're basing it on the 20 dwelling units per acre. But so that results in 12 units.
My question, I guess, is is that 12 units and only using the front due to the fact that it's restricted by the current height standards and density per acre?
No, it's mainly the fact that the developer will be required to replace the units that are demolished if they are occupied by low-income households. So unless you substantially increase the density, the net increase in units and the financial liability that they have, the financial burden that they have to deed restrict the affordable units is such that you have to make the development a much denser than what currently is allowed in order for the project like that to be affordable. Now, back when you included that as a project, that was because MidPen was interested in doing that. And MidPen is different. MidPen is a nonprofit housing developers. And they have access to funding from the state that would help finance an affordable housing project. And the entire project is going to be deed restricted. So to them, that is a feasible project. But if you're not partnering with a nonprofit, a private developer it would be very difficult for a private developer to come in and deed restrict. And I'm assuming because the units are currently older and that there may be a portion of the tenants currently are considered low income, or they are considered low income because they are seniors and they don't really have income. And so therefore, then by default, the developer may have to commit to deed restricting a quite significant portion of the units as affordable, and therefore the project would not be financially feasible. That's why we are suggesting in a way that you minimize the demolition required and just use the open area to add units to it to allow the owner to increase the property value by adding units without the financial liability of deed restricting low-income units when they are not subsidized for it, like a nonprofit developer would.
Okay. And so you said that we were talking to MidPen about this property in the past?
In the past, they did a study on this site for us and showed us phased build out of like tear down, rebuild in a phased manner. Yeah, so good news is MidPen is interested in Capitola. You'll see on 38th Avenue, I think it's 1066. It's the old rehab building. It's along the rail corridor. It's listed as hospital. That's the old rehab building. MidPen will be coming forward in the near future to a planning commission, city council regarding this project. And they were in partnership with the previous owner there. So there we have a reasonable, we're saying 52 units because we actually have a developer who's interested and they'd be 100% affordable. So that's a project that's in our horizon, and therefore we're putting that on the map. So if we had something similar on the 600 Park Ave site with an affordable housing developer who had intent to redevelop it in a plan, we could do that there. But at this point, we don't have that. And I have reached out to that owner in the past. And the last time I sent a letter, probably a couple years back, or maybe a little over a year, and they responded that it recently changed hands within their family and they're looking into options, but we're not ready to look at redevelopment at that time. So, and we did send another letter out to them more recently in the past 3 weeks, because we held a developer interest meeting for the housing update and sent letters to all property owners that have commercial properties or mixed use or multifamily in the city of Capitola. So huge mailing effort, and had a Zoom meeting with anyone that was interested in talking about redeveloping their property. And we did have a turnout of about 12 people, and we got some letters back with interest. So that's what we're trying to build, that momentum of, if they say, they're interested, then we maybe can get to a higher number.
So I guess I'm curious if in the future they are interested in redeveloping, is putting them in the housing element as only a net 12 units going to prevent them from, or make it less likely for them to develop a higher density or redevelop the property at a later date?
No, that
No,
won't prevent
okay,
them.
great.
Yep. So they're in the affordable housing overlay there, which allows a little more flexibility and they're allowed 20 dwelling units per acre within the affordable housing overlay.
They're only allowed 20 dwelling units per acre.
Under the current affordable housing overlay, it's
Okay. So if we wanted to increase that number, then would that be better to correspond with the housing element?
So a lot of the higher density projects that exist today are because of our plan development process. So they could also come in through our plan development process, which gives a developer a little more flexibility in terms of site planning when you have a larger site. And so that is how many of the darker blue, which we show, those are plan developments that allow a little more flexibility. So they might be able to go in under that as well. So there's multiple options.
And I guess my final question, which is related to that, is we don't want to rezone. Is a housing overlay considered rezoning, or is that a more streamlined process than a potential full rezone?
If you're placing the housing overlay to additional properties, that's a rezone.
Okay. Mhm.
That would be a rezone because that would be.
And is that something that's going to be so labor intensive that it would risk pushing the deadline of the housing element back, or is that something that we can consider?
Yeah, that's it would need to be studied and done. We could attempt to do it. I just wouldn't want to put in our housing element that it's necessary, but we could on the side be updated if we wanted. You know, we can take our time with a rezone process. We just don't want to have it in the housing element as a necessary requirement.
Mm-hmm, because then if it does take
Because of
too
the
long,
timing.
then we could miss our deadline.
Yep.
Also, let me go back and verify, like, you know, every time I come up with new question, I read the law again and and I want to double check one thing and get back to staff. If we do not identify that site as a site needed for the RHNA, whether it will be subject to replacement requirement. And if it doesn't, then for projects like 600 Park Avenue, that may be better off not being in the site's inventory, but still allows them to intensify in the future. That's something that I need to check the law.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a couple things.
I'm not gonna push, too tired.
First, I was looking at the senior center garden and then the Red Tree property being right next to it. It might be a great place to look at senior housing, affordable housing for seniors. And maybe only a portion of it would be needed and the other portion could be mixed use, you know, or the hotel, or it looks like it would be a great area for something like that for the senior housing. I also think that we should really continue to look at ADUs and granny unions. I still think that it's a great way for us to get our numbers up. And there's got to be some way to make something work for the city of Capitola, since there is no open space for us to create the housing instead of just trying to get it all done in the 41st Avenue corner.
I wanted to get some clarity first on something that was brought up previously around the buffer zone. So right now we have a 19% buffer, correct? And the state recommends 15 to 30%. And my understanding, if I'm correct, is that the state can selectively decline any of these sites, correct? They can look at any of these particular sites and say, that's not feasible in this site. That one doesn't count anymore. Is that correct?
Usually they don't do that, but they would ask you to substantiate your claim. And it really, if you're unable to satisfactorily answer their questions, then they would ask you to remove a particular site. And I'll give an example when some of the questions before talked about single family neighborhoods and all that. Redondo Beach, we have the general plan update, and there was one single family neighborhood, really, really tiny sites, very similar to the size that you have. And it's been rezoned to 55 units to the acre. But HCD tells us that we cannot use it for the arena because we cannot convince them a developer would come in and buy 17 of these parcels to come up with a half-acre site to build housing. So we were not able to use that.
Right. So I guess what I'm wondering is if we had a 19% buffer, is there a chance that the state would send our site inventory back to us with sites that they have gotten rid of, which then brings our buffer down just from what the state told us that we couldn't use? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Yes, I think in most cases, we don't usually have that issue of being asked to reduce the size. We try to put forward the best defensible site inventory. But in the event that it does reduce to the point where we need to have some kind of buffer, and that we may have to add some other sites.
Okay, I think that's kind of my concern, is that if we drop our buffer down to 15% and then the state doesn't like some of the sites we have, now our buffer is below 15%. And that's what I'm concerned with.
I would be very concerned to go in at 15% and then lose, have that happen. And then it's better to have more and be in a safer spot.
Okay, so that was the clarification that I needed on that particular issue. In terms of the sites themselves, I agree with what Commissioner Westman said about the Bay Avenue and Capitola intersection. And really up that whole area, it looks like, if I'm not mistaken, the areas that you have marked here is 64 and 65 that are up Capitola Avenue. Is that the area where that taqueria and the car detailing place is? Is that what that site is? Okay, yeah, someone sent us an email recommending those sites and it looks like they're already selected. And so further up, that entire kind of corridor up until the city limit on Highway 1, there's like an empty, a day spa next to Capitola Mansions, really that whole space starting at Bay and Capitola from the produce stand up to the city limits. I believe, if I'm reading this right, it's already zoned multifamily residential. Is it just because it's low density that we didn't consider using more of those sites, or did we not consider using more of those sites because there's some other reason?
No, so just to clarify, I believe we're talking about the produce and fish lady site, or further up headed towards the highway.
That whole corridor, yeah, starting
corridor
there and then driving up towards Highway 1 where the city limits are, right on the other side of Capitola Mansions.
So I think we should take another look at that.
Okay.
I think that might have been overlooked. So I think we will definitely consider those sites and see if they fit.
Okay. And then what about right across from the produce stand there's that bank across from Grady's. And I know that we were already talking about how some bank sites are being considered for redevelopment. And that's technically kind of already in a neighborhood. Would that be a site worth considering as well?
I don't think it hurts to look. So we'll look at that. We did not consider. So the bank across from the produce.
Union Bank. Yes, Union, thank you. Yeah, so those are that's just one of the areas that I was looking at and considering that we might want to consider for other sites. And then other than that, I'm really impressed with the map. I appreciate the input that we received from residents. I think I was going to ask a lot of questions that we got in the emails that were here on the dais, but I think a lot of it was answered already in the presentation, which is helpful. Thank you so much. I know that there's a lot of work that goes into this. Thank you all so much for doing that. I know that this is a difficult process and we all have a lot of concerns about losing local control and what's going on at the state level. like Commissioner Esty, I also work in Silicon Valley in government relations, where my job is literally to track what other cities are doing in this front. And I can tell you, we don't want to be in this builder's remedy camp. We don't want to be there. It doesn't look fun. And I'm concerned that I would be highly concerned if we were to face what I'm seeing other cities face. That doesn't mean that moving forward to the point about rezoning, outside of this process, I think that's something that we may want to consider outside of our RENA process, so that 8 years from now, we're essentially 8 years ahead, I guess, because we'd already created new sites that maybe we can consider the next time we have to. And then in the meantime, just continue to fight for the local control that we're slowly losing. But otherwise, I think we're on a good track so far, and hopefully we'll just keep on keeping on, get it done.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to just, thanks, sort of echo. I think what I'm getting from everybody is that we would like to see a little bit more wide variety of areas being utilized. And I think that was well pointed out by everybody that spoke. I had a question, and I'm having a hard time understanding the numbers of the parcels on here that are highlighted, but I was just kind of looking at where the Quest Diagnostic doctor's office is, and they've kind of got that. It's kind of residential. They have a large parking lot. I don't know how well it's used. I've never really around it that much. So that could just be totally off.
Is that on Capitol Avenue? The one right here?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was just a thought off the top of my head. And
it's Dignity Health and Quest.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. That's what it's called now. Because something over there is highlighted, but I couldn't tell if that was it or if it was on the other side of the street. So I just thought that might be something to look into. And yeah, I think this does bring up a really good topic about the rezoning, but I do think that it's something that we should let lie in regards to the housing element, only because I understand that we could run into some issues as moving forward. And thank you guys so much for all the work. I can't even imagine doing any of this, so I really appreciate it. I know everybody else up here does too. So I think we have taken the presentation and we've all said our piece. And we look forward to a more finalized second draft.
Excellent.
Okay.
So our next steps are that we'll be working on the next draft. We would like to stay on our timeline of getting this out for public review. So most likely the next time we talk about what we're producing will be while it's out for public review with additional sites, and we'll bring it to you for more discussion. So at that point, we're not tied down to anything, but it's but we need to stay on track. So we've got a 30-day public review and then 15 days for us to respond to comments. So look forward to next time. Thank you for this evening.
Thank you so much.
Answer to your satisfaction, because I was having a hard time following all that.